in short, there are a number of political parties, the so-called smaller parties. I know New Nation Movement and the others. Remember, they took the IEC to court. They are the ones whose action eventually resulted in this edition of the 11 independents that we had in this past election. Remember, they said the Electoral Act was unconstitutional. Aspect of the Electoral Act, it was taken to court. They took the IEC court and they won. And then the Constitutional Court said, sorry, you need to make provision for independence, which means changing the laws, changing the political party funding act, changing a whole other things, to make sure that they are accommodated this independence, including adding them to the what we call the NPLC, the National Political Party License Committee, which was only for, as you hear the name, party. There's no candidate. But if you are running in an election, you are part and parcel of that structure. It is a structure that the IEC uses to consult parties on a wall-to-wall basis in between the 5 years and in between elections and by-elections when there are grievances and so on. So to start with, they did win, and then of course we ended up having what? This independence. And then, of course, then the campaigning starts, which is what you want to talk about. In spite of the grievances that some of the parties said, they lost, by the way. The IEC won that case, which was one of the 17. I'm sure you are aware that there were about 17 cases before this election. One of them, obviously, which the IEC won, which said that those parties which were saying that the election date must be suspended, it must not be, the election must not take place until they've been given space to register. They lost, and therefore this is where we are. We managed to go through. So those parties are out. They have to try in the next 5 years, or at least in the next 3 years for the 2026 local government elections. Now, campaigning overall, it was fierce, and we have to divide it into two. Campaigning for the independence, which was, in my view, was not a level playing field. Remember, they didn't have enough money. The only one, I understand, we had about R1 million or so, but even had to borrow money from the bank. Zaki Ahmad, independent in Cape Town. Also, I've just been checking the wires. He hasn't even won, you see, because he didn't, get a sufficient number of votes to even get one seat. The rest of the other 10, obviously,
if he was the big one, yes. If he was the leading independent,
yes.
The other ones.
The others, yeah.
And then how would you then?
So maybe before, that's why I was saying I'm separating it into two. The independence campaign didn't really go very well because they didn't have money, they didn't have resources, they didn't have posters. One person saw this woman. It says vote for Anele.
Yes.
It says vote, and then at the bottom it says Anele. Now one lady says, this lady, is she selling some perfume or something? She was one of the independents, you see. So which tells you that pound for pound, their campaign period was not that good. Come to the political parties, it was all about money. If you are ANC, if you are part of the top 5, ANC, DA, EFF, IFP, and maybe ACDP or UG, or Freedom Farm Plus. I'm talking about the parties that are previous, registered political parties among the top 5. You obviously be very happy that your adverts are being heard of in the radio, in the TV, in the social media, and in the billboards, and along the N1, along the N2, and so on, all these big roads. But what about the smaller parties? Not the same thing could be said. We saw just a sprinkling of a few of the Rise Mzansi and all the other small parties, Sarah, and so on. But campaigning, pound for pound, they were outclassed by the big guns. Because the big guns managed to fill up stadiums. Remember, Siangoba, in Mobile Rally, we are winning and so on. Yes. And then Musimaini Bosa, also there somewhere in Joburg. They managed to fill the stadium to some extent. But to answer your question about campaigning, the playing fields were not there because what you see in the leaderboard with these big parties obviously having amassed all these voters is actually an aspect of what? Of the disproportionate, concentration of the big parties to their advantage on campaigning, whereas the smaller ones and the independent candidates, lost out.
So would you say then campaigning really does work for political parties, as you say? It wasn't fair for smaller parties who did not really have the finances to have massive campaigns.
Exactly, and my point is that remember, in terms of the Political Party Funding Act, all those parties that you see amassing billboards and almost every second, third radio, TV, advert being about them, It's an aspect of the money that they receive, EFF as well, 10 million, the other one 12 million, the others like 30 million. If you can go look at that report, you will see that they had lots and lots of money. So to that extent, it's a sad indictment on our electoral system, because it was supposed to be proportional. That's why we say proportional representation. But it's still heavily skewed in favor of the big parties. The big parties end up being the bigger winners. The smaller parties end up being a 0.0, non-entity, non-identifiable, sorts.
Yes,
especially if you look at the leaderboard, you see 0.0%, 1%, one seat. Who wants to identify with that party in the next 5 years? So in the next 5 years, you can just imagine that some of the voters might actually start deserting these parties. One of my colleagues was saying, "Where's COPE here? We didn't even see COPE. It had 2 seats. It has disappeared. 2009, it had about 36, or was it 36 or 38 seats? Now, where is it? It has disappeared."
And then just looking at like the political landfill, what do you think, and how South African citizens actually voted? What do you think South African citizens are actually trying to tell political parties?
Simple, almost what the president underscored. We are not giving any of you an overwhelming mandate. We want all of you to work together. It doesn't matter whether it is government of national unity, a national coalition of sorts, strategic, whatever, as long as you come together. Because individually we don't trust you. The surveys had told us, for instance, you must go and check the Human Sciences Research Council previous surveys, voter participation survey, election satisfaction surveys of the past 5 years, like 2019, 2014. They were saying the same thing, that there's a definite reduction and dwindling of trust. Trust in what? Government overall. Trust in politicians. Trust in political parties. Trust in municipalities. Trust in many institutions in South Africa. Even the church or the religious bodies. Trust, they are not that low, but they are also down there. And so it tells you that this trust is obviously what is reflected in this year's elections.
And then just for my last question, and just to keep it brief as well, what do you think a political space as well would look like? What do you think the next 5-6 years would look like, considering how the parliament now will be structured?
It can't be 5-6 years. Remember, if from here we're going to 2029. Yeah, from here, because we are not talking about the local government elections of 2026.
Yes.
So it's 5 years. So in the next 5 years, it's going to be definitely a coalition. It's going to be a question of parties talking to one another. It might be very chaotic. It might be very disorganized, disorderly even. It might disappoint many of the voters. We might see frustrations in terms of laws, policies not being passed because now there's fighting there. I don't even want to talk about the public service, because last year I was invited to one of the parliaments to talk about what coalition government might mean for the public servants. They should be worried about their seats and their positions, because they might be removed. One party says, no, remove this DG and this deputy DG, and others say, no, we like the DG, he must stay.
So people should anticipate fear?
Not necessarily fear, but a highly disorganized, I would say, maybe disorderly like I'm saying, but an equally chaotic political process between now, May 2022, up until I think it will be May 2029. But I wouldn't say it's fear as such, because in the end, South Africa has shown that they have what it takes to be able to withstand the government of national unity. Remember the parliament of Nelson Mandela, 1994 to 1999. They had IFP there in the parliament. They had the National Party, people whom they called political enemies, but there was no fighting. So I wouldn't say, I don't want to be a fear monger to say, yes, South Africans must be fearful. No. They mustn't be fearful, but they must know that it's going to be a choppy, maybe even a rough political ride between now and 2029.